There's a certain allure to horror video games. Just the idea that you're the one running away from the boogeyman and not watching things play out like some helpless observer just fascinates me. But what really makes a great horror game is getting that balance right. Having enough control taken away from you to creep you out, but still giving you the feeling like maybe you're still in control, even though control is an illusion and at any point it could be game over. Horror games tend to go against what most gamers have wanted from games for the longest time, and that is to feel empowered. This fact alone is why almost all horror games, up to fairly recently, have given you some way to fight back. Clock Tower is anything but conventional, with it being a point and click horror game where its main focus is running away rather than confronting your attacker. Games like Clock Tower didn't really exist in the 90s, especially on a console. Sure, there were console themed horror games, but they all involved you confronting what's coming after you. However, with Clock Tower, you have no choice but to run away from the giant scissor wielding maniac that's out to get you. It all began in September. Jennifer and her friends from the Granite Orphanage were wanted as adopted daughters. While walking through the creepy forest, Jennifer and her friends soon spot their new future home, the Clock Tower Mansion, named after its most prominent feature. Jennifer has reservations about her new home, but Miss Mary, their teacher, assures her it's a nice place. They soon arrive at the mansion, but all is not what it seems. Miss Mary leaves the girls in the foyer to go find Mr. Burrows, Jennifer and her friend's new adopted father. After a while waiting, the girls start to wonder what happened to Mrs. Mary, so Anna asks Jennifer if she could go look for her. Shortly after leaving the foyer, Jennifer hears a scream and rushes right back to her friends, only to discover they're now missing. It's not long before Jennifer soon discovers the fate of one of her friends, and if Scissor Man has his way, Jennifer will be next. What are you waiting for? Run, Jennifer, run! What makes this game's story great is that you're not bogged down by it. The game's opening does a good job of setting things up, and then BAM! You're on your own, looking for your friends, and all the while avoiding Clock Tower's resident psychopath. Every room you explore is a chance to piece together the mystery of the Clock Tower Mansion, but also another possible encounter with Scissor Man is waiting for you. Is he in that box? Nope, it's just a cat this time. But be ever vigilant, because Scissor Man is out there to get you. If you are spotted by Scissor Man, then your only choice is to run, and then once out of sight, try to find a hiding place. Some hiding spots work and some don't, but there are a ton of ways to try and shake off Scissor Man. Running is a good way to get around the mansion, but it will drain your sanity, so avoid running unless it's absolutely necessary. Your sanity starts off blue, and in that state you can easily deal with any number of jump scares this game can throw at you. But the further it descends to the colour red, the more vulnerable your sanity will become, and in this mental state you will find even running away from Scissor Man a challenge. But watch out, whenever your sanity flashes you're in panic mode. Repeatedly pressing the B button might help you to get the upper hand, but if your sanity was in the red before going into panic mode, then it's as good as a game over, as your frail mental state isn't equipped to handle this spooky encounter. The only way to recover sanity is to rest when Scissor Man isn't around. Least we not forget this is still a point and click game, albeit a very spooky point and click game, so you'll have to search every room for things to interact with, as well as items to help you throughout your ordeal. Now, this is where Clock Tower could have gone wrong, but cleverly keeps the pointing and clicking to an absolute minimum, which means if you get stuck, you won't be for long, as there's only so many rooms to investigate, and only a few possible ways to try and use your collected items. This sparing use of the point and click interface helps to keep things in Clock Tower moving forward, and unlike most point and click games, almost every playthrough of Clock Tower is completely different, with the littlest choices you make having a big impact on the story. And with Scissor Man always hot on your trail, how could you ever possibly get bored with Clock Tower? There were times when playing Clock Tower that I had to remind myself I was in fact playing a game. I haven't played a game this engrossing in a long time, and it was super refreshing. But the best thing about Clock Tower is, it won't take you that much longer than the average horror film to beat it. Clock Tower isn't a long game, clocking in at around 2 hours for your first playthrough, and that time also includes the odd peek at a walkthrough as well. I know 2 hours isn't long for a game, but Clock Tower is more like an interactive horror movie experience anyway, so it's a game very suitable for short gaming sessions. Sound and music is used sparingly to great effect within Clock Tower. A lot of the time this game will be in almost silence, apart from the faint sounds of Jennifer's footsteps, which is super creepy. But when something happens, or more likely when Scissor Man shows his face, the excellent music kicks in to really heighten the scare factor. Also, you can easily tell the SNES's colour palette is fully utilised to craft an excellent looking game. Walking through dimly lit corridors into often darkened rooms, you can't help but be on the edge of your seat. This game's many gruesome set pieces are all very imaginative and will easily satisfy any horror fan. The only criticism I can give Clock Tower is, if you're not into point and click games, then this game will be a hard sell, even more so as it's a point and click game using a controller. Now all that's left to cover is this game's history, and there's quite a lot of it, like why wasn't this game released outside Japan? How come this game ended up being translated by the fans? Where is this game's place within the confusing Clock Tower series? But more importantly, what inspired the mad genius behind Clock Tower? Clock Tower is something of a departure for Human Entertainment, as they had for the longest time been mainly focused on making sports games, and a Human Grand Prix series. Some of the employees of Human Entertainment were able to convince the higher-ups at Human Entertainment to develop more experimental games. This led to an in-house competition where employees would submit game ideas, and Hifumi Kono's idea for Clock Tower was chosen. Hifumi Kono was heavily inspired by 80s horror films in the development of Clock Tower, in particular the films by director Dario Argento. So much so that the look, and even the first name of Clock Tower's heroine, is directly taken from Dario's film Phenomena, as well as Scissor Man's weapon. Phenomena was also known as Creepers in the US, and was the spark that birthed Clock Tower. But Kono more than proves himself as a game creator in that he can take Dario's themes and ideas and build upon them to create one of the most unique horror games ever made. Clock Tower was originally released on the Super Nintendo and then later ported to the Sony PlayStation, PC and strangely the WonderSwan. The original SNES game would prove to be a hit in Japan, but was never released in the US or Europe. To be fair, Clock Tower came out pretty late in the life of the Super Nintendo. The time it would have taken to translate Clock Tower and then come up with some kind of marketing strategy for the West would have both been too late, as most American SNES gamers would have moved on. But why the PlayStation port never saw an overseas release just baffles me, but what's more baffling is its sequel did. A year later, Clock Tower 2 was released on the PlayStation in Japan, but was renamed just Clock Tower for its Western release. I do understand why Human Entertainment decided not to release the first game overseas, and instead just focus on its more marketable 3D sequel. But ignoring the first game would only confuse gamers unfamiliar with the original game's story, but this confusion probably led to some new attention for the first Clock Tower game, so much so that the game was fan translated and given the new subtitle, The First Fear. This new subtitle is meant to help people from getting confused, and trust me, this series needs all the help it can get with its messed up chronological order. So in order, we have the first game, which was never released outside Japan, but was later dubbed by the fans as The First Fear. The sequel, Clock Tower 2, was renamed just Clock Tower when it was released in the West. Next, we have a spin-off game called Clock Tower Ghost Head for Japan, but later renamed Clock Tower 2 The Struggle Within for its American release. Thankfully, this turd was never released in Europe. A few years later, Human Entertainment went bankrupt, and the Clock Tower series was sold to Capcom, which led to a third entry in this series being jointly developed by Capcom and Sunsoft. This third entry in the Clock Tower series completely flopped, and this forced Capcom to rename Clock Tower 4 as Haunting Ground in order to help market it. But unfortunately, with Capcom releasing Haunting Ground around the same time as Resident Evil 4, you can easily guess which of these two games would end up being successful and reinventing their respected series. After a decade of silence, Hifumi Kono is bringing back Clock Tower in the form of an unofficial spiritual sequel called Nightcry. Thanks to a successful Kickstarter campaign, Project Scissors met and exceeded its goal of $300,000. The plan is to release Nightcry for Halloween 2015 on mobile, PC and the PS Vita. Nightcry's release is also planned to coincide around the 20th anniversary of the original Clock Tower game. The Clock Tower series is one of the strangest ones out there, and apart from Clock Tower 2, The Struggle Within, every entry in the series is at least worth talking about. But it's the First Fear that gets all the attention, and with good reason. It's not only one of the most important forefathers of the survival horror genre, but it's where I believe you could trace back the beginnings of psychological horror gaming to. And since this game wasn't released outside Japan, as far as I'm concerned, it's fair game to play the fan-translated ROM through means of emulation. Thank you for watching, and watch out for Scissor Man next Halloween.